on the call.
Well, we'll get started here in a few moments.
Yeah, I'm showing we have 2 minutes and 10 seconds blast off. 2 minutes, 10 seconds till blast off. Are you drinking hot tea?
I was, but now it's just water.
Man, I have to send you the name of this tea that I found for like a sore throat. It's like remarkable. It's amazing. I'd go get it for you, but I might miss the start of the webinar and then you wouldn't be happy. So
No. You stay right where you're at, young lady. We're but you can send me a link and I'll try to find that tea.
I've got some in the kitchen, but you know.
You can tease me with it, right? Here, Brett.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff. It's really great.
I love tea.
Kind of coats your throat a little. It just gives it a lot of comfort.
Well, that's good. I really do want that link or whatever. Yeah. Just what kind is it called? What is it called? Do you know?
That's what I can't remember.
Oh, but I have that problem too. Happened after 50.
It's good stuff.
Yeah, good deal. Well, a little less than a minute here coming up, so we'll get ready to get started. Do you need anything before we begin?
Yeah, I want to know who wrote Lorna Inspires on their name. What's that?
I don't know.
I don't know, but I just love that.
That's really amazing.
I'm not sure. Well, thank you, my lady. Thank you very much. I'm Lorna.
Well, who is this?
I'm Lorna.
You're Lorna? Oh!
What are the odds of that?
I know. Lorna.
I teach image consulting and etiquette.
Oh,
are you
nice
serious?
To meet you. I thought somebody was having a joke on me.
You too, my lady.
Lorna, you know, I was like, that's funny. I love it.
No.
We're happy to have you this morning, Lorna and Lorna.
Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad so many people have already joined. I know there'll be some others that join us shortly, but if you'd like, I'd love to get you started on time, Lorna. That way that as these others come in. I'm Brett Augustine. I am a recovering business advisor for the North Central Texas SBDC, Small Business Development Centers, and which is a leading provider of assistance for small businesses. We're grant funded, which allows us to offer our services at no cost to you, as well as presenting people like Ms. Lorna Kibbe, who's going to be with us today. If you would please put your questions in the chat box and I will be happy to help get those questions answered with Ms. Kibbe as we go. And at the end of the session or during the session, she may say, hey, would anybody like to respond on it? Please feel free to do so. And let's just let her drive that mission, if you would, please. But please put your questions in the chat box just to keep things going in a forward direction. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time and don't know Miss Lorna Kibbe, allow me to let you know she is with the ASBDC, that's America's Small Business Development Center conference speaker, has been for 10 years working with the SBDC and Florida Gulf Coast University, as well as Ms. Lorna Kibbe is a leadership expert, and we are so blessed and happy to have her with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Ms. Lorna Kibbe.
Thank you, Brett. And you know, I'm glad that you mentioned about chat, just to, you know, make sure everybody knows. I love it when you put stuff in chat. I really miss face-to-face. You know, Zoom is cool, but I miss face-to-face, and so I love it when people give us comments in chat. So please feel free, you know, to contribute in that way. Anytime. Always makes me feel good. All right, I'm going to share my screen so we can talk about this subject today. Here we go. And are we good? Are we live?
Well done.
We are live. Yay, we are live. Okay. So as you may know, we've been doing a series on speaking, on making amazing presentations. And this came about because in all my leadership work, I've done so many presentations that I decided to get some certification as a speech coach and really work on helping people to do better presentations. I worked with the Florida chapter of the National Speaker Society and became their Academy Dean for new speakers, and really loved sharing with everyone how to make their presentations more effective. And so that's what got us here today. And I'm wondering, have you ever been in a presentation when it seemed like the speaker was just kind of all over the place? You know, where you weren't really sure what they were talking about, and they were just going from point to point with no transitions, and you just couldn't even stay with them. You weren't even engaged, and you started checking your email and doing other things or going somewhere else in your head because it just wasn't really keeping you interested. If you've ever experienced that, you know exactly what we're trying to avoid. And that's what we're teaching in this series, is how to avoid that. So just a quick review for those of you who are joining us for the first time, and for the others who have been here. We've had 2 sessions previous to this one. And in the first one, we talked about how to make your presentations effective, presentations must-dos. And we used this little VOW acronym, AEIOU, and we talked in depth. And the reason I want you to know about this, if this is your first time, is because these are available on demand. And at the end of the session, I'm sure Brett will be sharing with you how to access that. So you can go back and look at the recordings and you can see these if you missed them. So we talked about must-dos. It must be actionable, engaging, interesting, organized, and you focused. And those, what we said, were the must-dos, and everything that we're doing now is helping us to understand how to do those things while we're putting together this and delivering this presentation. Last week we talked about, or the last session we talked about structure. This was our second section. And we decided that we agreed, I would say, that we had to have a structure in place before we dive into content. And the whole point of the structure that we talked about was something that means you'll never ever have to worry about how to structure the presentation, because the presentation will always be structured in this way. And if you just look at this, you can see why it would work. It makes logical sense. But again, the recording's on demand and you can go listen to it in depth. But we talked about the opening. You always start with your opening, and then there's a transition to your main point. And today we're going to be talking a lot about the content of those main points. And then you repeat transition, main point for as many main points as you have. You have a transition to your closing. It's not just a close, there's a whole transition process. And then finally your close. So that just gives you a quick wrap up of what we've talked about so far. And like I said, feel free to go back and look at those. But today we're going to focus on content, because now we understand the essentials. We understand the basic structure. We want to take all the stuff that you want to include in this thing, which there's probably a lot of stuff, and figure out how to make it understandable, how to make it interesting, how to make it so that people will be able to follow you and stay engaged in your presentation. So that's what we're going to explore today, is content, how to put it together. And I think it has some really interesting information for you that'll help you with this. We can break it down into some parts that will make it really logical, I think. So let's get started on that. First, I'd just like to share with you, some steps in developing your content and talk through these a little bit. And I'm going to give you some more specific steps. Well, let's just talk about, how do you even get started with this whole thing? Like sometimes, I remember in the beginning, it's like, I didn't even know how to get started. I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't know what I needed to say. So this will help you just to get started. Okay, so the first thing is you have to first identify your audience. That's where you should always start, identifying your audience, because everything that you're going to do has to be targeted to your audience to be effective. So you need to know who those people are going to be. Now, sometimes it's hard. I do a lot of conference speaking, and I have to do some work to figure out who's going to be in my audience. And it may be a variety of people, but that's okay. You can usually find some things in common. And if they come from different industries, different occupations, that's important for me to know when I'm doing my content, when I'm putting together my content, that I'm speaking to a wide variety of people. Or maybe they're all in the medical profession, and I want to make sure that everything I do is relevant to them and I connect it to them. Whatever, you need to do everything you can to learn about your audience. If you really have no clue, somebody is asking you to come and do this presentation. So ask them some questions about who's going to be in the audience and how much do they already know, because you don't want to go in and insult an audience by just spending all their time giving them stuff they already know. Maybe they're more advanced than that. Or maybe you think they're advanced and they're really not. So the first thing is identifying your audience. Before you even start thinking about your content, you need to know who's going to be benefiting from what you present. So start with identifying your audience. And then here's the other big one, clarify your purpose. What's the point of this whole thing? Why are you even making this presentation? What's the purpose of this? What do you want to happen when you're done? If you can't tell me in a few words what the purpose of the presentation is, you probably shouldn't be making a presentation. I need to be able to understand exactly what this is all about, why you're doing this. This is critically important as we go on with this, because this is going to help us in developing content, especially when we have too much content to present and we don't know what to present. Here's a simple rule. If it's not tied back to that purpose, it doesn't belong in your presentation. And sometimes we have so much information and it's really interesting stuff that we'd like to share. You go back and say to yourself, does this tie into my purpose? If it doesn't, something's off. Either your purpose is wrong or your content doesn't belong. So it'll help you to sort out what content really belongs in that presentation. So what's the purpose? Narrow it down to a few words. I need to be able to say, what is the purpose of this thing? You need to be able to tell me just like that. If you can't, go back. That's where you have to start. Okay, so clarify your purpose. And then let's start with what you know. I mean, obviously you've been asked to make this presentation for a purpose, or you've decided to make it, and probably because you have some really good, intense knowledge on the subject. So start by just making a list of the things that you know that you want to be included in this thing. I mean, if I'm talking to you about how to go shopping, I need to talk to you about what? How to select a store, how things are organized in the store. You know, just start brainstorming with yourself, like making yourself a list of all the things that you know that really need to be included. But remember, with each thing that you think about, like, boy, I really want to tell them about, you know, the carts. Does that apply to the purpose? If it doesn't, then you ditch it. So everything has to go back and apply to your purpose. Once you've got kind of a handle on what you know, it's time to do your research. Now, here's the thing, even when I'm an expert in my topic, anything that I'm going to talk about before a presentation, when I'm putting it together, I Google it anyway, because you never know what may have happened. There may be some really current news that you could bring in. It would make you look really cool. You know, just last week, this topic came up in USA Today, and this is what they were saying. You know, it shows that you're credible, that you're keeping up with whatever you're talking about. Or maybe things have changed. Funny story, this happened to me. One time I was doing a session on how to do training, and I was talking about this. Maybe you've heard of this. This is preferences and learning style. And what experts tell us is that people either have a tendency towards visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. This has been around for years. You've probably heard this, you know, that a visual learner needs certain cues to be able to learn, and auditory, and so on. I'm sure you've heard this thing. And we used to really teach people to try to appeal to everybody in their audience by looking at what their styles are and, you know, trying to put it towards that. So maybe if you have someone in the medical profession, they're all going to have more of a kinesthetic approach or whatever. So I'm talking about this. Someone in the class raised their hand and said, you know, that theory is no longer like respected. What do you mean it's no longer respected? We've been doing this for years. Well, the recent studies show that there's really no relevancy, that this doesn't prove anything. And, you know, I was really caught kind of with my pants down, because I hadn't heard that. You know, I was like, I started to get defensive. Like, look, I've been doing this for a long time. This isn't there, you know. Sure enough, I Googled it after the class, and yeah, people are saying that, you know, maybe this is not as critically important as we thought, that in fact, people have preferences that sometimes don't match their styles, and we should be maybe training to their preferences. You get the point. Anything that you're going to do, research the heck out of it. Make sure you know your stuff. Make sure you know what you're talking about. Bad news about this is you're going to know a whole lot more than you can actually put in your presentation. But that's actually good news, because somebody's probably going to catch you on it. Somebody's probably going to ask you a question where all this research will come in handy. But it will only strengthen you and depth, and you know, make your depth of knowledge greater. So it's definitely worth the research. You need to know your stuff. There's nothing worse than going in and having somebody, you know, catch you with your pants down because you didn't know that something had changed. So research. All right. So here we are with our first 4 steps. Identify your audience, clarify your purpose, start with what you know, and then research what you know to make sure you know what you know. And then it's time to review your structure. And that's what we talked about last session, was how do we structure this stuff? So now we want to review how these things are going to come together. We know that we're going to need an open, but strangely, we're not going to start by developing our open. In fact, we're going to go right to our main points. Why is that? Because our main points need to tie us back to the open and to the close. So the open and close are probably the things that you actually want to work on last. Those are important as far as content goes, but your main points and that depth of your content and your main points is pretty much going to drive how you open to get people engaged in what you're about to say, and how you close to get people to remember what you just said. Okay, so those kind of come later. So review your structure, and then it's time to develop those main points. And developing those main points is, I know, maybe not as easy as it sounds. How many main points should you have? How many do you have? Well, this is the first question. And the question you have to ask yourself is, how much time do I have to present this? Because there's usually a time limit, and it's a cardinal sin to go over time when you're making a presentation. When your presentation is supposed to be done in 1 hour, you end it in 1 hour. So you have to be careful with your content to make sure that it fits in an hour. People will ask me sometimes, how do you do the timing on this? Do you sit there and rehearse to make sure that it's an hour? No, I don't. That would drive me nuts. But what I do is I make sure that I have made my content flexible enough so that if I have to drop something or rearrange something in a hurry, I can still get my main points across. So that takes a little bit maybe of skill and experience. But the first thing you want to do is just figure out how much time you have. And this is a simple formula for, if you don't have a lot of experience, don't worry, it's okay. Simple formula. For a standard presentation, your main point discussion for each main point should be about 10 minutes. So if they want you to present for 30 minutes, you get 2 main points. The rest of it's open, closing questions, right? If they want an hour, if you look at 10 minutes, so you can kind of figure out about what it should be. Now, sometimes the main points can be 5 minutes. Sometimes they can be an hour. It depends on the kind of presentation you're doing and how much time you have. Like if I'm doing a training session, I might spend a lot more time than 10 minutes on a main point. There's 3 things you need to do about training. I mean, we're doing, like right now, we're doing a 6-hour overall presentation on how to do presentations. If I was teaching that live, that's 6 hours of content. And look at how many main points I'm going to have. There's going to be more main points than 3. So it just depends. But the important thing is that you have your main points set up in such a way that people can follow what you're doing. And this goes back to structure, trying to create a way so that there's a roadmap, which we've talked about before, something that the people in the audience can follow to see where we are in this thing and where we're going. Okay. So you don't want there to be so many main points that people can't follow you. And you know what else? That hurts you, because if you have so many main points that people can't follow you, you probably can't remember them either. It's really great if you have a presentation where, 3 is a magic number, 5, okay. But you want to be able to remember them too. When I'm getting ready to go into a presentation, the day of, before, when I've done all the preparation and all the work, when I'm thinking about what I'm going to do, actually, I'm laying in bed last night thinking this. What's my structure? What am I going to say when I start? What are my main points? Can I name my main points? What am I going to say in my close? And if I can remember that, then I don't have to memorize my script, because I know where I'm going. If you design this presentation, if you've ever done this, you know what's in it, especially when you're speaking from your expertise and from your heart. So decide how many main points you want. One way to do this is you've already figured out what you want to include, all this information. So just make a list of everything you want to do. A really cool tool to do this with is actually Post-it notes. Because sometimes what I'll do is I'll just write all these things on my Post-it notes that I know I want to include. And then I stand there on my wall and I just place them. Like, does this go under this? Or does this go under this? I mean, is this a separate main point? Or does this all relate back to this main point? And then I can kind of visualize, if that's your style, I can kind of visualize, what my main points are and where these things go. I find myself throwing some things out because they're not related to the purpose or they don't fit, or they're creating a whole nother main point, which is way far off where I want to go, especially considering the time I have. So that's just an idea. You have to identify what those main points are going to be. Once you've done that, you have to figure out how to order them. So this is the next step. So how do I put these things in order? So I have 3 main points. I have 5 main points. There are ways to do this. There are methods that you might be familiar with. Some of it might be like maybe a sensible acronym like PARTS. Today, I'm going to show you actually a formula for writing your content that uses the acronym PARTS. And I'll show you what that stands for in just a few minutes. That might help you to remember the parts of your presentation, right? How to put your parts together. So maybe an acronym, or in the beginning, I used the vowels A-E-I-O-U to help you remember that they need to be action oriented and so on when I did the first presentation. Sometimes a time order is appropriate. Like, let's say you're talking about something in your organization and you want to say that, when we opened our doors in 1991, this was our vision, this was our mission. And you talk about that. That's your main point, the history of the company, where you were. And then you want to talk about problems that you have today. And so in 2005, this happened and it changed the industry. Or how about this? In 2020, there was a pandemic and it changed the industry. It changed the way we wanted to do it. And then you move on to the future. Okay, so in the future, based on these changes, here are some things that we're going to implement to protect us and move us forward. So, you started with the history of the company and you started to what happened in 2020 and then what we're going to do in the future. So a time progression, that's a nice way to arrange your main points. Sometimes topic order, like if I were doing this live, how to do a presentation, I'd probably say that we're going to talk about the 3 Ds. And my 3 main points would be that first you have to develop your content, then you have to design your presentation, and then you have to deliver the presentation. Those would be my 3 main points: develop, design, deliver. So I would organize all of this content under those 3 main points. So that might be another way to do it. So you can see there's a lot of different ways to do this. A problem solution, here's a problem, here's some possible solutions, and now let's figure out which one we're going to do, or this is what we're going to do. So some logical way of organizing the content so that people can follow you and it's making sense to them is what you're going for here. Organizing your content in a logical way. All right, this is a lot, isn't it? So now what to include? Back to this. We already talked about this, in a way that it has to be tied to your purpose, but sometimes you still just have so much information that it's hard to prioritize what to leave in and what to take out. So this is just a simple little guide that I show people to help them think through it sometimes. You have to include anything that's going to shut down your operation. It's going to cause injury. It's going to invite a lawsuit. They have to get this or it's going to be catastrophic. So that has to go in first. Don't throw out anything that might result in some catastrophe, right? From there, you can go to critical. What are the most important things you need to know or do? What are the essentials? What's critical that they know? And if I have to throw something out, then I can go down to the common stuff. What will he or she have to understand well or do most often? Sometimes your time is so limited. I've done 10-minute presentations, 5-minute presentations. I've done 8-hour presentations. I've done 4-day presentations. So it really just depends on what's going on. Sometimes I have a lot of room for the commons. Sometimes I don't. It depends. So just a little guide for you. But what to exclude? Come on, you know the answer to this one. Anything that's not directly related to your purpose. So anything that's not directly related, keep looking back at that and say, this isn't really related. That comes out no matter what. Okay, how are we doing so far? Everybody hanging in? Whew, it's a lot. All right. We talked in the first sessions about transitions. And I just want to stop and mention this as I transition to the formula for main points, is that, have you seen presentations where somebody is talking and then just they abruptly switch to the next main point and you're not really sure we switched? You know, there always needs to be some kind of a transition in there to take me from where we were to where we're going so that I understand we're moving to the next main point. If you don't do that, either it's going to be very abrupt and people are going to be like, wait, what happened? Or they're still going to think they're on the first main point. They don't know that you transition to the next thing. So there not always needs to be a transition. So like for right now, for what I'm about to do, I might say something like this. Now that we've reviewed structure and learned the basic steps of writing content, let's dive into those main points and learn how to develop compelling content. That would be my transition. So, you know, I've stopped with that subject and I'm moving to the next subject. Transitions are really important to help your audience move with you. Okay, so always make sure that you have a transition. Sometimes when I put together my first PowerPoint draft, I find that I'm missing transitions. You know, I just go from this subject to the next one. I have to put a blank slide in there and figure out a way to make some kind of a transition to reflect back on what we just talked about. This is what we've done. This is where we've been. And now this is where we're going. Transitions are really important. Okay, so back to main points. Now we're going to find a formula. This is the parts formula I was talking about. That's going to help us to design a really powerful and engaging presentation. People will be on the edge of their seat if you just use this formula. All right, so here it is. It's called parts. It involves a phrase, an anchor, a reflection, a technique, and a sail. And I'm going to go through each one of these and show you what these mean. The thing is, one thing I want you to know about this is because this acronym is presented in this order doesn't mean that these things are necessarily going to happen in this order. It's not like that. You may start with an anchor. You may use several times in your speech or presentation, you may use reflection. So usually the technique and sail, that technique could get wound up in there anywhere. The sail's usually at the end, but not necessarily. So you'll see what I'm talking about. But just know that just because the formula is written this way doesn't mean that these things are going to happen exactly in this order. Okay. I think probably the best way to show you what I'm talking about here is I'm going to give you an example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just stop here for a minute. And I'm going to talk to you as if you were an audience in one of my sessions. And I'm going to do one of my main points. And then what we'll do is, as I explain each one of these things to you, you can help me pick out where I did that in my presentation. You see what I'm saying? So this should be fun. So listen as I go here. Let me set you up. You're going to be my audience, and you're going to be an interactive audience. So we're going to pretend like you did some things. I wrote a book called Becoming a Better Boss. And that was my first book. My second one is Becoming a Better Presenter. But look at the subtitle on the book to help you understand. Your guidebook to 25 fundamental management responsibilities. You know what that means? I have 25 main points that I can use anytime I'm presenting on Becoming a Better Boss. 25 main points. So what I usually do with this is I ask my audience, I ask the people who have asked me to come, what's important to you? Look at the 25 and tell me what's really important to you. And that's what we'll focus on. We're going to focus on 3 or 4, whatever they want, depending on the length and so on. So you can set your model up that way so that on your subject, you kind of have your 25 topics or your 10 topics, depending on what kind of presentations you're doing. It'll help you to, switch out main points when you need to and have them prepared. I hope that makes sense to you. Does that make sense, Brett? Okay. So in this example, I'm talking to people about the difference between leadership and management. The reason the book is called Becoming a Better Boss is because I didn't want to just focus on leaders and I didn't want to just focus on managers. I wanted people to understand that there's a little bit of both of that going on. Okay, so let me just try to do this for you. And you can see the parts as we go along. So here you are, you're my audience. Here we go. All right, so we have been talking about leadership versus management. And you've had this discussion with me so far about what you think are the difference between leaders and the differences between managers. What makes them different? Now, I'm understanding you to say that managers by definition focus on tasks and leaders by definition focus on people. So there is a real difference. And on top of this, we just looked at a list of competencies for leaders and managers. And I asked you to go through the list and just put a little check mark you know, we had leaders on one side, managers on the other, and you put a check mark where you think you typically fall. Because when I asked the question earlier, how many of you think you're leaders? Some of you raised your hand. And I asked how many of you think you're managers, and some of you raised your hand. So it definitely looks like we have a difference here. Like some of you see yourself more as leaders and some as managers. So this little self-assessment was to help you kind of line up and see where are you kind of falling, more as a manager or more as a leader? Because the question becomes this: which is better? And the answer to that, of course, it depends. It depends on the situation. Sometimes you need to be a manager. Sometimes you need to be a leader. Really, a great boss understands the difference in the two and can apply as needed. Let me tell you a story about my pastor. This is a true story. I had a wonderful pastor in my church, and he was a leader. I mean, visionary. Never seen anybody really with the kind of leadership ability that this pastor had. He could see things, big picture, visions. It was incredible. He did have a dark side. And the dark side was that he had zero management skills. Seriously. One Sunday when we went into the church, the person who usually comes into the church and sets everything up hadn't made it. She was sick. He didn't know how to turn the lights on. His answer was, we don't need lights to do the service. And people ran around and scrambled and found ways to turn the lights on and all the things that he needed. He had no clue. He didn't even know where the light switches were. He was so stuck in leadership land that when it came to the operation of the church, he was clueless. He didn't understand anything about the budget, stewardship, nothing. He was just such a visionary. And like I said, he was amazing. He really was. But pretty soon we started to have some problems because we didn't have a leader who understood anything about managing the functions of the church. And interestingly, he had come from a long line of small churches. And we started to wonder. Well, I started to wonder because this is what I saw going on. A leader who was so stuck in leadership land that he had no knowledge of how to manage the operation. That's not going to work long term. Have you ever known a leader like that? Someone who was so stuck in leadership land that they really had no knowledge, maybe even interest in the operations of the organization? It's not a real good thing to do, is to get stuck in leadership land. But then again, I've known some managers who were stuck in what I call management land. And in management land, it gets a little depressing because they're very good at enforcing rules. They're very good at managing the operation, making sure that we are compliant with our standards and our goals and our rules. But they really don't have any big picture vision. They don't see beyond everyday tasks. They become very stuck in the everyday with no really hope for the future or idea of what it's going to look like in the future, and no real ability to see, that big picture vision of what we're accomplishing. Have you ever known a leader like that, really stuck in management land? See, neither place is a good place to be, really. The goal is to know the difference and apply as needed. That's the goal. So here's the thing. If you did that little assessment and you saw that you really lean way towards management, you might want to work on some of those leadership skills, because it's not a good thing to just be stuck in management land all the time. And on the other hand, if you did the assessment and saw that you're really high on leadership skills, that's fine, but you might want to take a look at that other side and see what's going on in the operation and understand some of those management skills, because that's not a good place to be either. You need to be able to understand both skill sets to be a great boss and apply as needed. Okay, so that's my main point. That's my example. You with me? So now let's go back to the parts formula. And as we go through this, let's see if we can identify it in the example that I just shared and see how it applies. Okay. All right. So here we go. The first one is phrase. and fewer than 10 words, what is it you really want to say to your audience about this point? This could hopefully be something that would be repeatable, something that would stick with them. You know, the phrase that pays, we call it a foundational phrase. And in mine, you'll notice I didn't start with the phrase, but I'll ask you, you'll see in a minute. Let's see if you remember the phrase. Here's some examples of the foundational phrases. Okay, no pain, no gain. You've heard that one before, but see, it's very rhythmic and it's something I remember. And maybe if I'm doing a presentation on why it's important to have a strengthening program in our organization, like we should put in, you know, a gym and allow people to work out and be healthier. And people will say, oh, but they won't use it. Well, we can reward them, you know, no pain, no gain. Okay, so just some phrase that puts it in people. So when they walk out of here, they're going to remember that phrase. They may not remember every point, but once they start thinking about that no pain, no gain, it's all going to start coming back to them, what we talked about. Or how about this? I used this recently in a speech I did, a motivational speech to try to help people with going through change because of COVID. And we talked about resiliency. And I said, resiliency is not just bouncing back, it's bouncing forward. It's adapting, it's learning to change and to be able to go on and carry on anyway and to move forward. So don't just bounce back, bounce forward, okay, phrase. What's loose is lost. We use that with structure when we talked about structure. If our structure is all over the place, people are going to lose you. So what's loose is lost. How about this? Leadership management competencies. Know the difference and apply as needed. That was the phrase that I used in my example, and I used it several times. So they may not remember all the competencies, they may not remember all the differences, but they know that there's different skill sets and they have to apply one for the situation they're in, right? You see that? If you want it to stick, you'll need a trick. And that's where we're going next. We have a trick if you want it to stick. It's called an anchor. And that's the A in our parts formula. So we have the phrase and the anchor. Now, see, this is where it gets interesting because I didn't do the phrase first. That's what I was saying. It doesn't necessarily have to be in that order. And the anchor often finds itself in the beginning because the anchor is something that will help people to really tie in and relate right away, like a story. My story wasn't in the beginning, but do you remember the story I told? And, you know, my hope is that the story about my pastor will help you to relate to the content. And I said to you, have you ever had a manager like that? Have you ever known anyone like that? And so that story ties people in. It'll help them to remember the point here, which is that one or the other is not good. It has to be a combination of both, right? So you see how that works there? That was my anchor. Analogy, a comparison. Crabs in a barrel. Have you heard this one? You know, everybody's trying to get to the top and there's all these crabs in a barrel. And to get out of the barrel, they're climbing on top of each other and making everybody go down deeper, right? So some kind of analogy, you know, that might help people to remember your point. Remember, this is about helping them to remember that main point. Acronym, parts, that's what we're doing right now. We're talking about the parts of content. Hopefully that'll help you to remember what they are. Phrase, anchor, reflection, right? Technique, sale. Or maybe a short relevant activity would help them. You may have seen this one before, but I'll just talk you through it. It's not as effective on Zoom, but I'll talk you through it. A lot of you don't have your cameras on, but you can do this anyway, you know, Scouts on or something that helps them to remember your point. Like when I talk about communication, I talk about nonverbal communication and how important nonverbal communication is and how many times we're giving a message nonverbally that doesn't match what we say. And have you seen this? Maybe you've seen this. You tell them you ask everybody to shake out their arms and to just take their forefinger. And if they would, just put it right on their chin. And what most people do when I say put it right on their chin is put it on their chin. Even though I'm demonstrating cheek, they do it the opposite way. When I put it on my cheek, they do, you know, the people who are real visual will put it on their cheek, even though I said chin. Actually, very few people put it on their chin. Some people do. But again, you know, that's That's just a quick activity to remind people how important the nonverbal is. A lot of times when you do that in a live audience, and I don't know if you've seen it, maybe you have, people are shocked, that everybody's sitting there when I said, put that on your chin, and they're doing this because they didn't connect it. So something like that, short, relevant, memorable. That's an anchor to help people to remember the point. Great. The next thing is reflection. And what this is about is helping your audience to make it personal, to really relate to it, to help them to reflect on their own lives and work and see how this applies to me personally. So it's not about memorizing, I say here, it's about realizing. You want them to really dig and think about themselves. And there's a few techniques for this. And actually, do you remember how I did it in my story? I did it a couple times. I said, have you ever known a manager like this? Have you ever known a leader like this? Right? Here, listen, this is a very different question. Listen to this question. How many of you have known a manager like this? Now listen to the difference in that. How many of you have known a leader like this? If I ask how many have done this and people are raising their hand, I've known a leader like that. We're looking around the room and we're thinking, oh, wow, a lot of people have had a leader like that. Yeah, it makes sense. But what's your thought process when I say, have you ever known a leader like this? Now it's personal. Now I'm trying to think of a leader that I had like that. I'm not looking to see how many people in the room have had one like that. I'm thinking about me. I'm personalizing it. So those questions, how many of you have ever done this? Not so effective as have you ever done this? In speech coaching, this is called the hallway test. And the way you use it is you go into a hallway where it's just you and one other person, and you ask the question. And if you say, how many of you have had a leader like this? And the one person in the hallway looks at you like you're crazy, like, who are you talking to? How many of you? There's only me. See, that's how you pass the hallway test. You ask a question to just one person and they go, you're talking to me. And that's what this reflection is about. Talk to me, help me to reflect on my own personal situation so that this will really resonate with me and I'll be engaged in what you're doing. All right, that's our R. Our T is for technique. So you can have a longer lasting effect on your audience if you actually help them to take your theories and make them practical, do something that helps it to be practical for them. When we present a lot of theory and really no evidence of how to practice that theory, it's not as effective as when they can actually, experience it. So here's the question. How can you get them to act on it? What action can your audience members take to practice your message? Is there a way you can get them to practice it? What can you give them to do? Like, instead of asking them, what's your perfect day? What would your perfect day be like? What would your perfect day at work be like? Make them write it down. That's a much different activity than just supposing, right? Do you remember the tool that I gave my audience that gave them a technique to take it from theory to practice? I talked to them about their self-assessment. They did a self-assessment, and just for the record, this is what it looks like. So you can see here, they had their leader competencies on one side, their manager competencies on the other. They were instructed to say, well, usually I have more of a short range perspective, or usually I have more of a long range perspective. And they go through these, and then they have kind of a balance of where they're leaning, more towards manager or more towards leader. And so that's how I get them to take it from theory to practice. So that's what we mean by technique, giving them a way to actually try to practice it, try to do it. Yeah. Now we're on our S, sale. And this one sounds controversial. What am I selling? What am I selling? I'm selling the fact that this information I'm giving you is useful and that you're going to do something with it. In any presentation, I say this almost every time I talk about presentations. It doesn't matter really what you hear right now. It matters what you do when we're done. Yeah, it matters what you do with this. It matters if you take it and use it. And I have to somehow sell that to you. I have to inspire you to want to walk away from here and use what I just gave you. A real easy trick for this, well, I won't call it a trick. A real easy technique for this is the if-then statement. If you do this, then this will happen. Now, do you remember in my example how I sold it? If you find that most of your check marks are in management, you want to work on your leadership, because management land is not a good place to be stuck in. If you find that it's the way, I reversed it so that if you do this, then you work on this so that you cannot be stuck in one land or the other. So that was my sale. That was how to inspire them. And you'd actually be surprised. It works really great, because with that list, with the technique I've given them, they have specific things they can work on. And sometimes, depending on the length of time I have for the presentation, they even prioritize which 3 things they're going to work on. So there's a lot you can do with it. But how's my life going to change because of the advice you've just given me, or the information you've just given me? Tell me, because I can't figure it out on my own. You go and you say, okay, these are the things you need to do. There's too many. Just give me one thing. Give me an idea. Help me to really know exactly how to use this, because otherwise I just heard a whole bunch of stuff and I'm not sure what to do with it. So you have to sell me. You have to inspire me. So that's the parts formula. That's how it works. A phrase, an anchor, reflection, technique, and sale. If you use this with every main point, it'll all come together so that it'll be really compelling for your audience, because you've made it personal for them. You've given them ways to remember what you're talking about, and you've inspired them to do something about it, and given them a way to do it with the technique that you've described. How's that? Does that make sense? Now you have to do this for every main point. This is how you write every main point. This is how you put every main point together when you're doing a presentation. Now, I didn't talk about some other content that goes into your presentation, which is, of course, is the open and close, because like I said, we'll put that together last. Because now that I have all this figured out, I know my main points and I know what I'm talking about, writing the open is much easier. A lot of people want to start with the open. If you do all the other stuff first, the open comes pretty naturally, because you understand your purpose, you know exactly what you're trying to get across, you know what your main points are going to be, and now you can give me something in the beginning, a roadmap. You can give me something that helps me right in the beginning to be really engaged. So today we're going to talk about being a better boss, and I have 3 tips for you, 3 techniques. You take these away, I guarantee you're going to be a better boss. Do you want to be a better boss? Who doesn't? Right? So let's go. So whatever you are talking about the whole time, it's just going to come up into the open, and then in the close, it's going to be how to apply everything that we just did, right? Here's what I'm going to tell you. Here's what I told you. A little more specific. The first thing about opening that I would advise you is just to really make sure that you open with confidence. You have to catch me from the beginning. You have to get me in it right away. So the worst opening is, hi, thanks for being here today. I'm Lorna. I'm glad to be here. This is really nice. Yeah, you lost me. You have like 7 seconds to make an impression on me. So you better come out swinging. You need to come out and convince me right away that you're going to tell me something that I want to hear about. So open with confidence. Don't start with, hi, I'm happy to be here today. Don't start with a joke. Jokes are just a bad idea now, because you're going to insult somebody. Believe me, somebody will be insulted. Don't even try it. So you want to start with confidence, something that really helps me to know that you know what you're talking about. 3 ideas, just 3 ideas I'll give you today, even though there are others. A story is a great way to open. Stories get people interested right away. It resonates. It helps them to see where you're going. Story is a great way. You could do statistics. When I talk about presentations, I usually start with, 90% of people asked say that they fear public speaking worse than death. Really? And 51% of people say that they have passed on a career opportunity just because they felt like their speaking skills were not strong enough. Well, let's fix that. So I start with something like that, a statistic or a scene. Imagine this. You have to make a presentation and you are freaked out. This is the last thing you want to do. What do? Well, let's figure it out. So something, maybe imagine this, put them in the scene. That's another reflection technique. So Help your audience to shift focus in the beginning. That's an important part. These are just a few tips. Remember that when your audience comes in, they're thinking about everything in the world except what you're going to talk to them about. So whatever you say off the top needs to bring me right into what your subject is. So bring me in right away. That's why you don't start with, so I'm glad to see you today, because I still have time to think about all this other stuff. Now you got to catch me right away. You got to get me in there. Establish goodwill, your credibility, get their attention, make your purpose known. And in your opening, tell me why I'm here. I'm here to learn to make better presentations. I'm here to learn how to be a better boss. Tell me why I'm here in the beginning. So just a few tips for opening. Closing with purpose. When you get to your close needs to, really help people to put what they've just heard into action, to do something with it. So restating those main points and their significance is really a good idea. So, let's talk about the 3 things that we've discussed in putting together a great presentation. First, what is it? Let the audience say. Development, right, develop. And what's important about development? Let a few people speak. And what's the second thing? Design, right, what are we talking about there? Bring your audience into it. And what's the last one? Delivery, right, what are you going to do differently next time? Something like that to get your audience really into it. Make sure it just kind of summarizes everything you've done. Best closings, go back to openings, use a story. This could be very inspirational. The last audience that I worked with on making presentations, I had one person who called me afterwards who had to make a presentation, and let me tell you what happened to them. Okay, maybe a story or statistics. Remember the 51% of people that are afraid, that didn't accept a career opportunity? Well, let me tell you about somebody that did. Or is that going to be you in the future? Maybe go back to statistics. Or imagine this, your next presentation, you rock it. No nerves, you're excited, you're ready, you know exactly what to do. Something like that. So your closing wraps it up, puts a nice bow on it, gives them the inspiration, and leaves them with the next step. It leaves them with, what am I going to do when I leave here? Sometimes that's how I close. I'll say, depending on the number I have in my audience, because it can get crazy if you have too many that want to speak, or you just have to limit it if you need to. But I'll say, all right, one thing. I want to hear one thing that you're taking away, just one thing, or one thing that you want to learn more about. And I'll let people give input, which provides a great summary, because people come up with things that I forgot I said, that I talked about, and they expand on it a little bit, and tell. So it's a great summary for the audience. Plus, it gives them a commitment. They have just said out loud one thing that they're going to do, which makes them commit to it and inspires them. So that's a good closing. So there are lots of ways to closing, but be intentional with your closing. Make it purposeful, not just, okay, thanks. I've enjoyed being here. No. All right, your next step, by the way, the series, I just wanted to show you this, and I know Brett's going to show you this too. Next time, we're going to talk about slides and visuals, and then stories, and finally delivery. So we will get through the entire, develop, design, and delivery main points of how to make more amazing presentations, how to do presentations. Brett, what do you got for me? Do we have some questions? What do we have going on?
Okay, if anybody does have any questions, please go ahead and drop them in, or turn your camera on and raise your hand. That way we can even see you. But I don't know if they have any right now. I've heard a couple people saying great idea on that. Thanks for the point about transitions, for example. But you brought up some things to me, Lorna, again, as always. And I consider myself a very advanced speaker because of how many times I've done it. And I still learn things from you left and right every time. I've learned a great deal today, especially. Did you know that the if-then statement actually is how we first programmed computers?
Yeah, actually, I did know that. That's
a lot of people, a lot of the younger generation doesn't realize that. And I thought it was very great the way you incorporate that thinking, because it's really true in a presentation. If this, then this is the result of, and the way you did that for the leaders and the managers, I thought that was really Well, it was brilliance. It's a great way to do it, because that's how we think logically. It is. It's how we think.
Right.
Do any of you have any questions? Please go ahead and throw them in here. I'm looking at the moment. I'm not hearing any at the moment, but I still have plenty of other things that I learned, especially the personal reflection. A lot of times we forget that we need to connect to our audience. And I think that one of the best things I heard, like for you, whenever you mentioned the preacher, anybody who happens to attend church, they were sitting up and listening, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Just another way to reach the public. But I thought it was pretty interesting that your story was great, by the way. You know, that not being able to turn on the lights, I just imagine that, and it's like, you know, you're probably right. They were in the back room somewhere of the church.
Yeah.
And only the maintenance guy or the girl knew it, you know. And it's like, that's interesting, because there are leaders like that. So
they really are. They really are. You know, that's dangerous. And on the surface, it's amazing. You know, they're amazing. And we know a lot of people in history like this, but if they have the people around them to support them, they can live in that land.
right.
But if that support falls away, so does the organization.
Well, fantastic. Well, I don't see any questions at the moment, but if you do, I promise I'll come right back to it. Lorna, I'm going to let you finish out. Oh, wait, I enjoyed the discussion. Leader, manager too. Can you teach manager but not leader?
Can I teach manager?
No, you can teach manager but not leader. Excellent.
You can teach someone to manage, but it's harder to teach someone to lead.
Oh, that's a good point. You know, there's an age-old debate about, okay, this is a little bit off subject. This is not tied to my purpose. We should not.
Rope them back in.
There's an age-old discussion about, you know, born leaders. And there are leaders that are born with skills for sure, but it can be taught. You know, it can be taught. I do it every day.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
If there's just one trait a leader and manager should have, what would that be?
And understanding that you need to be able to apply the right skills at the right time. Sometimes you need to be a leader. Sometimes you need to be a manager. And if you can figure out when to do which, you're golden.
Great question, Mel. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, no, that's good. And great response. Any other questions? Last moments? I think we'll go ahead and proceed then. Would you like me to share, or do you have a closing remarks you'd like to make?
No, just that the parts formula on the surface may seem like a lot. You know, I don't know if any of you have ever have developed presentations and thought this much about it. And when I first started using this kind of technique, it threw me off a little bit, because, you know, I thought I knew what I was doing. But what I've learned is that if I use these techniques and structure the way that I've described, then I'm always able to make more solid, effective presentations where the content is compelling to everyone, and not just based on my preferences and my need and what I love, but what really helps my audience to be inspired to be able to take action on what they do. So I encourage you to, you know, to try to use this technique, to try to use the techniques that we're showing you for making amazing presentations, especially if you're new at making presentations. Spend some time with this, because it will make it so much easier for you. And you will never be in that 51% who feels like you can't take a promotion because your presentation skills aren't enough.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And just to reiterate something that you brought up just now, and somebody put a question in here about previous presentations. Yes, they are available, especially Lorna. You can reach her on our website. In fact, let me just share with you all a little bit of the upcoming, and you can go to our website, and we also have a YouTube channel for the North Central Texas SBDC. You can Google it, or we'd be happy to send you a link, and it will be having all of the past classes, which I highly recommend, so that you can catch up to where we're at, because it sounds like maybe somebody, this is their first class, and you should go back and catch all of them to really get how to make good content, because Lorna really spelled it out for us and we appreciate it. Upcoming, Eric Spellman, How to Rank Well on Google, October 14th. On the 19th, we have How to Attract Online Shoppers During the Holiday Seasons. Really? Is it that time already? Wow. Okay. And we'll start with, Thanksgiving before Christmas for those of you who just meshed them all together. But anyway, October 26th, How to Win at Social Media with Melissa Forciat. She's also new to us, and we look forward to seeing her presentations coming up. And guess what? Miss Lorna Kibbe's back. And she's on the 27th with slides and other visuals, as you saw on her upcoming as she was showing us. And we look forward to having her then. We also have Boosting Holiday Sales with Melissa again, as well as Creating a Marketing Strategy with Melissa Forciat. So if you have any questions, please go to sbdc.nctc.edu, or just look at the bottom, or if you look at the top there, you have our QR code. Please go ahead and do that quick link so you can go and register for any of the past or future classes coming up. And if you have any questions or want to talk to an actual advisor, we're happy to help. Just a quick note to some of our sponsors, which we very much appreciate. The Small Business Administration, the State of Texas, and North Central SBDC Regional Office, as well as the North Central Texas College, all of which support these and other conferences to make them free to you and at no cost to you. And if you would please remember, we have a survey coming out. Take 2 minutes to fill that out. Let us know how we're doing and give us some feedback on the speakers and their presentations so we can continue to provide great education for those of you that are starting your own businesses or maybe have been in business, as we're trying to make it a better place for small businesses in general. We do thank everybody for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time. We hope you have an amazing week. Have a good day.